first speaker is going to be Ouren, who is going to be talking about his banjo building endeavors and also giving us a performance. So put your hands together and welcome Eric.
Thank you, thank you. One of the things that I wanted to try and underscore, just so that I keep it in my own mind, is this connection of folk art sculpture to banjo building, so that we kind of keep that uppermost in our minds as or at least I am, as I'm talking about this, because there are a lot of different ideas that are floating around here, and I just wanted to make sure that I try and get in as many of them as possible. So hopefully I can talk for about 40 minutes and then we can play up here for as long as you can stand it. Okay. Yes, it was working. I'm just going to do this then. So in 2014, not too many months ago, I was awarded a Prairie Lakes Regional Arts Council McKnight Fellowship to build a signature line of open back banjos. So you would say, but why? What? You know, I was educated as a sculptor and have a background in cartooning, illustration, photography, printmaking, and wood carving. What does that have to do with banjos? I've worked installing art in art museums and art centers and galleries in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And I've shown my own artwork in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan. So basically, you know, why banjos? What gives? Where does that come from? Okay? So when I'm talking to students, and especially seniors, I like them to get at, you know, their beginnings, what their origins are as in terms of where they come from as an artist. And so this is me. My origins is that I was found growing from a tree stump. Okay, so there's always that wood part of me that is always there, and this is photographic evidence of that. Okay, so we keep talking about wood as we go along. This is, I don't have a pointer, but that handsome youth in the center is me when I was about 12. My dad and a bunch of his friends went together and bought a communal pickup, the old Chevy truck there, and they used to go woodcutting together. And of course I was the one stacking the wood, not cutting the wood. But through that I learned the value of both work, hard work, and the practice of doing something like that as a kind of repetitive process, and also hanging out with some of these guys, which was always interesting, especially at my age. You know, they were, and a lot of them were teachers. The guy standing next to me to my right, he was my 7th grade math teacher. The guy on the other side was his wife was one of the elementary school teachers, and the guy in the closest to me here was the superintendent of the school system. So, and then the guy on the far side taught typing, I think, in the high school. Anyway, so dealing with logs and things like that, I started to think, well, I should carve wood, and so these are some masks that I made by splitting a log in half. It had some branches that came off either side, and so this was kind of my first foray into figuring out how to use chisels and a mallet. And I enjoyed really working with my hands, enjoying the immediacy of the process. Very different than when I was in college. I was doing a lot of printmaking, and when you're printmaking and you ink up a screen, a silk screen process, and you cover that with ink, and then go to print whatever it is you're going to be working on, you kind of lose touch with what's going to happen. You're just kind of hoping that everything works right as you pull your screen up. So with this, you can tell right away what it is that what's happening with the wood. If you need to keep going deeper, if you've made a mistake, you just figure out how to work around that. About not too long into college, I I met a guy that built and repaired log buildings, and he introduced me to chainsaws, and he also kind of became a mentor because he'd been a sculptor as well. So, and because he was working on log buildings, he would have a lot of kind of scrap end stuff that then he started kind of shuttling off my direction. And so one time he stopped by with a big log and a chainsaw and kind of rolled the log off the trailer and said, "Here you go." And then there were some other materials that he had dropped off before that, or that I went to pick up. But this is kind of a representation of my undergraduate work. And a lot of it is getting back to talking about that folk art stuff. I'm doing kind of a folk representation as a counterpoint to the classical examples, as we'll see. This totem pole on the left is about 14 feet tall. That next image, that's about 7 feet tall. There was the log that this guy dropped off in my yard. So that was an 8-foot tall log. And you know, as you're thinking about if you're going to do figurative sculpture, you always have things like this to kind of refer back to. So you've got these kind of classical examples. This is the Doryphorus, or the spear bearer sculpture, a Roman copy of a Greek original. So I'm using that as a stepping off point, or as a counterpoint for the things that I was doing. So then I went to, eventually got around to getting to grad school. Here's another 8-foot tall figure, and when I was doing that one, I was thinking of the David. So you have that kind of reference as you're looking at these things. And then, of course, you know, you're getting any kind of these kind of body representations. You can always kind of zip back to what you have grown to expect in terms of male sculpture. This was a Christ figure, a life-size Christ figure that I did. Anyway, this is kind of if you can read that, this is my favorite Peanuts cartoon, which always reminds me of sculpture, because this is basically what we do, is we make stuff and then, you know, we set it all out and then we say, yeah, I suppose you're all wondering why I've asked you here today. Same with this group here. But, you know, and this is talking about kind of the material that you're using, and then also working within the variety found within that particular material. So, you know, if you're, well, I mean, you'll see other things as you go along, but, you know, if I was working with a figurative sculpture, there are lots of kind of content changes that you can make as you're working along, or if you're working in ceramics, something like that, you can, you know, if you're working on a teapot kind of shape, you can change that infinitely with this variety that you're working with. In the early 90s, I started showing, I learned how to do a Scandinavian flat plane style carving. So I took these to art fairs in the upper Midwest 5-state area for a couple like 2.5 years. And during that time, I carved almost 600 one-of-a-kind figures like this. So, and as an example, here are a couple. So you get an idea about what those looked like. And then because of the, you know, when you're carving a figure like this, essentially you're roughing things out with a bandsaw. Because I had done chainsaw work before, I thought, well, you know, I could make bigger things. I just use a chainsaw instead of the bandsaw, and I could make, you know, the same kind of carving except bigger, and they are easier to sell. So this is kind of what you refer to as a bread and butter kind of carving. And this would be the standing bear. Everybody loves a standing bear. How many parents have standing bears on their front porches? So, you know, you could do different sizes and things like that. And I I don't think I have a single one left. And then you know, there were other things, owl carvings, other bear carvings, gnome carvings. There's a cat on a stool. This is a hand-carved gnome or Nissa figure. And I also sort of was the resident chainsaw carver at the Nicollet County Fair in St. Peter for maybe 4 or 5 years. And, you know, which again was very similar to going to art fairs, except you didn't have to talk to anybody until after you turned their saw off. So anyway, but it was always nice. I always enjoyed visiting with people because they'll ask questions about the things that you're carving, but they'll also share their life stories with you too, which is, you know, that gets a little tedious, but it is kind of interesting too at the same time. There's Barrett Ouren with a pig. Barrett Ouren is here. Do you want to stand up? And this is my daughter Barrett, in case anybody know her or not. Now you do. And here's my son Peter when he was a baby. He'll be 16 in a few weeks. I also was hired to do a chess set for German Park in New Ulm. They built a giant chessboard, and they wanted a chess and checker set that people could take out and play. And so I spent a summer working on that. There's Peter when he was a little bit bigger, running around, probably where he shouldn't have. But there you get the sense of the scale of the pieces. Those are all the pawns, or some of the pawns. Because I lived in the Norseland area, my neighbors had, or at least these neighbors had spent some time in Norway. And in Norway, you turn every corner and there's a troll like this somewhere as a public kind of sculpture. So they came back wanting a troll carving. So I did this for them. There's Barrett with short hair. And a few years later, they wanted another one for some relatives. So I carved this figure, which stood about this tall. You know, they were all roughly about that size. So they, you know, more kind of folk figures. I've also done stump carving. This is a bust of Beethoven carving for a piano teacher who lived outside of Nicollet, Minnesota. So there's a close-up of that. This was in her garden, so the Beethoven would look at her from the garden. You know, look at her in her house. So better than a garden gnome? You be the judge. This is, you know, eventually I started teaching here, and I wanted to make some smaller work that was a lot easier to move around. And so I did a series of these small object sculptures that were based on metal kinds of objects that then I scaled either up or down and then transformed them into wood. So you really start to lose the functionality of or at least the history of the function of the thing, and just look at them as sculptural objects. This one you'll all probably recognize. That was done early on when I was just starting teaching here. In about 2004 or 5, I started getting more interested in making instruments. I started out kind of paying attention to guys like Otto Rindlisbacher, who used to live in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. And he was a collector and creator of things that were termed lumberjack instruments. And lumberjack instruments were very simply instruments that were made by the lumberjacks in the late 19th and early part of the 20th century to pass the time during the winter time. And often they probably couldn't afford regular instruments, so they would take boxes and, you know, whatever, put a neck on it and string it up and play it. And so that was something that was interesting to me. It seemed very sculptural and yet functional at the same time. So I did a show here. I built 30 instruments. And the first one was the fiddle in the top center, just trying to figure out how to make something like that. And then that kind of morphed into all of these other instruments that were much more lumberjack-like, you know, using cigar boxes. The one on the top on the far right is a bouzouki that uses a tennis racket as the, you know, around this portion. And there's a trivet for the sound hole. The back side of that one is made from the curved part of the toboggan that I took and cut in, you know, kind of merged together. A lot of cigar boxes, one of those bamboo food dryers on the far side, gourds. This instrument here was a fishing float, so you'd attach your net to a fishing float. So I made a fiddle out of that. There's the one on the top left is a cheese box fiddle. The next one over used teak chip bowls that I put together, and again that had a trivet for the sound hole. This one here had a candy box that had come from the 1898 World Fair. You know, so finding a lot of different things that then I could turn into an instrument. This one you might recognize as a violin case that had a crutch and a plow handle on the top. Another chip bowl for this banjo here. This is one of those door knocker things that had those little balls on it that when you'd open the door it would play a nice tune. So it got to where it could play better tunes than that. And at this point I stopped building instruments because one of the things that I was finding out is that I wanted them to play better than they did. They were more sculptures than anything. There was a few that played well, and so I really wanted to take some time to think about what makes a good instrument. How do you do that? I wasn't trained as a luthier. I was trained as a sculptor, which, you know, that's a little bit of a different background for that. So I took some time, started kind of thinking about how I would do that differently, and until I kind of realized that the dowel stick design that you use in banjos allows you to make a sound box out of anything. So I went back and I had some little those little chip bowls or popcorn bowls, whatever they were, and I made this little banjo, and it actually sounded pretty good. I carved the top. All of the frets were placed accurately, and I was using real frets instead of, I guess I'd used real frets on the other ones too, but anyway, it kind of got me recharged into thinking about how I was going to make more of these things. And so I made more, and a lot of it kind of started out with these tins, finding that tins were a good sound box for an instrument. And so there's a lot of different kind of instruments here. The one in the upper left is actually a wood top banjo. And then as we go down, that's a dulcimer, a 3-string dulcimer, 5-string banjo, a guitar, another dulcimer, a dulcet joe on the lower left-hand side, a banjo that has a wooden body, a ukulele, a mandolin, and a short scale banjo here. Do I have sound on this? Yeah. So this is I refer to Willie as my R&D department. He'll take my instruments and actually play them, since I have been just kind of learning as I've been going along. This is one of the cookie tin banjos. And he's playing in a style called claw hammer. If you see his hand like this, that's an old-time way of playing, rather than the scrug style, which is an up-picking three-finger style. So you can see that they make, it's pretty. It sounds good, but it doesn't sound like a traditional banjo. Just to give you some kind of background on banjo, the earliest kind of banjos come from Africa, and it's called an akanting. This is Bill Evans playing an akanting, and it's basically a gourd instrument with a stick through it and anywhere from 1 to 3 strings strung on it. Usually there's a shorter string, so at least you'd have 2 strings, and that gives you the drone sound that the banjo is known for. And here's some examples of, at least the middle one is an akanting. The 2 outside ones are some early gourd instruments that ended up in America, brought by slaves. And so this is where the banjo comes from. It's essentially it started out as a gourd instrument stretched with a goatskin head, and then with strings strung on it so you could actually play it. This is one of the earliest paintings of that gourd instrument. This is from the 18th century, and you can tell looking at this that this instrument has 3 main strings and then a 4th shorter string, and then obviously the gourd and the stretched head. Anyway, so this instrument has been in this country for a long time. These are some of the fretless gourd banjos that I've made. I've got a lot of gourds in my studio waiting to be made into other instruments. And so this is Willie playing a gourd banjo, so you can get an idea about what those sound like. And this one has a fairly small gourd on it, so if the bigger the gourd, the kind of deeper the sound. So anyway, that gives you a pretty good idea. So at some point, a friend of my family said, "Why don't you make real banjos?" So I thought, okay, why don't I make real banjos? Well, the biggest thing was trying to get the pot or the rim, all of that stuff kind of put together. Plus, there's a significant cost in parts and things that are different than some of these other tin banjos that I was making. But so in 2013, I drove out to Michigan and I spent a day with Bart Ryder. Now, Bart Ryder has been making banjos for about 30 years. He makes probably a banjo a day, so he's pretty prolific in the small production banjo shop world. And so I was able to spend a day with him and figure out just, the kinds of things that he does to run a production shop, or to at least be able to turn out and reproduce the same quality banjo every time he makes a banjo. So that was an invaluable experience, and he was great. He was really engaging and really willing to share his time, which was great. And so one of the things that I have decided about the banjos that I'm making is that my dad has a farm in southwestern Wisconsin. So I thought, well, I really like the idea of being able to use wood that is found locally, and I can get a lot of material from his place. And so I decided that for the most part, my instruments were going to be built from local materials, from either Wisconsin, Minnesota, maybe Iowa, but also recycled materials, so that as you can pull in, especially around here when college students are moving out, I have found a fair amount of furniture that's all hardwood. You take them in, you take them apart, and you make banjos out of them. Which for me is more sculptural kind of stuff. Here's from a few years ago when this is wood that I hauled for my dad's, and then had milled, and then spent the day cutting them into slabs to length to build banjo necks out of. And then the way that I'm building my rims is known as a block rim style, where you're cutting these individual sections all the same, glue them together, then glue the halves together, and then stack them. So this is what they look like stacked. There's some neck material. Some neck material in the back of the image, but basically that's how I'm getting the initial rim set up, and then it gets put on a lathe, and I'm turning the rims to various sizes. Typically, you're using your rims are 11 inches, 12 inches. If you're really building things like reproduction minstrel banjos and things like that, you can get into 12 and 13 inches, but I don't have that capability on my lathe yet. So anyway, although a lot of these, I ended up buying a lot of tension hoops that were kind of smaller sized tension hoops, so I've had to kind of fit my rims to the tension hoops. So they're anywhere from 10.5 to 10 7/8 size rims. And these are what they look like once you got them all turned and sanded. Just there's no finish on any of these at this point. But one of the things that I'm interested in that I think is kind of a drawback in a lot of people's block rim construction is that they're not really paying attention to what can happen with the different colors of the different woods that you can use to band the rim. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to work on developing. And the other thing that happens with rims like this is that because woods have different hardnesses and there's a different kind of organic structure to each material, sound travels through all of this in different ways. And so the way that you put these things together is going to give you a different tone depending on what that combination is. So you never really know what these are going to sound like. Even when you're repeating a stack, it's not always going to sound the same. So it's in that way, these things kind of have a life of their own. Here's where I was last summer when school started or ended. Rims, trying to match them up with necks. And then this was the first one that I did from after getting all of that stuff together. So this is banjo number 1. And so it's a traditional open back style. It's a folk instrument that has been built in this fashioned for the most part for, 100 and some years. Anyway, let's see. There's the heads are usually like goat skin, or you can buy a synthetic skin that kind of approximates goat skin as well. This one, most of the material in it is redwood, which is kind of an odd material to use for a banjo. You typically are using woods more like walnut, maple, cherry. Some people do a lot of mahogany, which isn't local, so I kind of stay away from that stuff. This wasn't local either, except that I bought the redwood at a garage sale, so that's local and it's recycled, and it was a really nice board. So this is a kind of a smattering of banjos that I had done by the time school started, I think. So there was 7 of them there. This is what they look like on the back side. So you can see lots of different woods being used. This is what's currently in my office. And then there's a few more that are under construction, so I'll be adding to that. I've also been able to take the knowledge that I've gained from building these instruments and have students then also make instruments. And these are dulcimers, so it's an easy instrument to play, and just using the smaller tins and putting a neck on them. They're different than the kind of mountain dulcimer that you're probably more accustomed to seeing, but they still do the same thing. They still sound pretty similar. And most of these people want to make more, so they're hooked. Last semester I had a student that built a mountain banjo, which uses a smaller stretched head, but a lot of the material is wood, and it's something that you can build out of your garage for the most part. These are, I started experimenting with unusual materials. Somebody asked me recently, what's an unusual material that you make banjos out of? And so I've been using cardboard. I thought that would be an interesting material to start experimenting with. And so the one on the left is a cardboard banjo with kind of a glue and water paper mache that goes over the surface. That glue, water, and the paper that's on there gets super hard and rigid, and so it almost sort of goes back to being wood again. The one in the center, I formed that from a balloon, and because this stuff is essentially wood again, you can cut it, add to it, keep adding material onto it, and kind of reform it however you want and however it works. So that one has a wood top on it, and when you turn it around, it looks sort of like, if any of you have had pets before that are outdoor dogs and you ever pulled like a swollen tick off of them, this banjo kind of looks like a swollen tick. And then the one on the far right is another cardboard banjo with a bigger 12-inch hoop on it, and then I stretched a goatskin head on it. It likes to stay tight when it's here, and then if it goes somewhere else, then the head drops, and we have been having trouble kind of keeping that one stable. So but it sounds amazingly good for a cardboard instrument. So I've been really kind of pleased with them, and also am interested in kind of following that line of building.
It occurred to me recently that the image of the banjo has really been a large part of my life for a long time, and I thought, okay, here's where I've seen this forever. When I was a kid going to church in the Lutheran church, we used the red hymnary or hymnal, whichever. And on the cover of the red hymnal was that image, which looks like a banjo. So as I'm sitting there in church drawing Jesus on the bulletin insert and looking at the front cover of my hymnal because I couldn't read it, I was getting banjo in church. Now I'm not sure that there's any kind of theology of the banjo or salvation by banjo, but this probably always confused me and always was always kind of deeply embedded in my consciousness, and thus I can't help but make banjos now, and always, have this to thank for that.
So there you go. That's what happens when you're not clear on your symbols for kids. I like to think about, obviously, what goes on when you're making instruments. This is a statement made by another banjo builder who died recently. But he said that given that we are humans and we have our 5 senses and our hands to make things or do things with and so on, I think there's enough pain and suffering in the world already that as humans we don't need to add to that. The only thing you can do with banjos or any musical instrument is to make music with other people. As far as I'm concerned, that is the best thing that humans do. So I like that that statement because one of the things that I really enjoy about banjos is that, or making instruments, is that you're making them for other people to play and enjoy. It's a little different than making sculpture, where you're making something because you enjoy it, and then you're hopefully finding an audience for it. But it's sort of a one-at-a-time thing. Here, with these instruments, people can sit down with a basic kind of knowledge set and create music together. They can play music that's been around for a long time, create new music, whatever it happens to be, but it ends up being a lot of fun. And being able to make something like this just is kind of like the cherry on the top of the malt, or whatever it is that you do. Here's my dog. She's always horrified whenever I play. She tends to go find the other dog, and then they hide in a corner for a while. But here I must have caught her where she couldn't get away. Anyway, this is inside of my shop, just so you kind of get an idea about all of the different stuff that goes into all of this. But all right, one of the things too that's been fun about this is I've sort of given myself permission to write songs as well and play them. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to sing and play some songs for you. Some of them I've written, some I've arranged. I guess that's kind of the gamut of these things. And I've got some special guest artists with me today. I have Barrett, who will be singing and playing, and also Dan Halverson, who's going to be playing some of his instruments. So anyway, if we can get some down lights here so that we can actually see what we're doing, that'd be great.